Welcome to the Missionary Mobilization Podcast, a resource for Christian leaders who want to increase the number of missionaries around the world. This podcast is a ministry of the Center for Missionary Mobilization and Retention at Trinity Bible College and Graduate School. Visit us online at missionarymobilization.org. Now, here's your host, the founder and director of the Center for Missionary Mobilization and Retention, David Jacob.
Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to the Missionary Mobilization Podcast. Our goal is to equip and encourage mobilizers and missions pastors from around the world. And we'd like to thank Assemblies of God World Missions who help sponsor our podcast. Their nearly 2,700 missionaries reach the lost by training believers, serving the poor and suffering, and planting churches in 255 countries, territories, and provinces. And you can become part of the team as well. Just visit agwm.org. We'd love to hear how you like the podcast, or perhaps you've got a suggestion for a show topic. Just drop us a note through our website, missionarymobilization.org. And please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, or Spotify. Our topic for today is Reflections of a Missions Pastor, how one church shifted their global engagement paradigm. And our guest is my good friend Matthew Phillip. Matthew currently provides leadership to the global engagement impulse of Trinity Church's vision. Based in Lansing, Michigan, Trinity Church has a 60-year evolving history of gospel partnership around the globe in 30-plus countries. Previous to this assignment, Matthew served as Director of Operations for Urbana 03 and Urbana 06. Trained at Fuller Theological Seminary, Matthew has also served as adjunct faculty with North Central University, New India Seminary, and Development Associates International. Matthew, so good to see you again, and welcome to the show.
Oh, it's a delight to be with you, Dave, and with your listeners.
Well, our friendship goes back 20 plus years, maybe a little bit more than that, 25, 30 years or so, as we attended the same church in Minnesota there before we were both even involved in missions. Isn't that right?
Way back, and I remember our little boys playing drums after the service.
That's right. That's right. Those were the good old days. Well, it's so great to connect with you again, my friend. And let's just start at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about your journey of how God led you into missions ministry.
Well, I think the engagement with missions is a constant repetition of us saying yes to the Lord when He opens up a new door, a new opportunity. So probably one of the greatest mistakes one can make is to pray, Lord, what do you want to do with my life? Because God surely always answers that. And that was one of the pivotal moments in my life when I made that mistake in my third year of engineering. And I said, Lord, do you have a plan for me? And I thought He was going to bless my plan. And He responded with a door for the next stage. And I had learned enough in my discipleship that it's probably wise to say yes to the Lord and have consistently and constantly stepped through a series of doorways that He has opened.
Wow. And so how did those doors open for you? For instance, how did you end up as Director of Operations for these Urbana conferences?
Well, what I just mentioned, when I was in college in India, I was discipled with InterVarsity's sister movement. And you fast forward many years, I'm in the States, and I've heard of InterVarsity. I've never been, and I've been to their meetings and some of their events. And I was in the final stage of joining a doctoral program at Boston University when somebody from InterVarsity wrote and said, would you be interested in helping InterVarsity with Urbana? And I just thought, let me just say yes so I could go figure out how they work and, what's the in and out. And when I went there and the invitation came, and then I made the mistake of praying, Lord, are you asking me to say yes to their invitation to help them with Urbana because they're director of operations had become a VP, and they needed somebody there for the next Urbana. And again, prayed over with 2 letters in front of me, that missions letter to the doctoral program at BU and the invitation to join InterVarsity. And against all Asian sensibilities, which said doctorates is the right way to go, the Lord pointed to this other path. And I just said, sure, let's do that, and said yes to that. And that was a wonderful opportunity to serve the Lord.
Incredible. And certainly that conference has and continues to mobilize so many to the mission field. And so now you're with Trinity Church. And so tell us a little bit about your current role and responsibilities there.
So I serve the Global Engagement Impulse. And I see myself as one of the leaders of our 70-strong missions team that is looking at the church and not at the world. Now, that might be a little counterintuitive because I fundamentally believe, as you do, Dave, in Missio Dei. And God moves in the hearts of people. And I see myself as somebody who has to pay attention to the 2,000 folks in our congregation to figure out how is God moving. And I feel my job is to fan that movement into flame, to pastor them, to disciple them, so that as they say yes to Jesus, they can move into better missions. So I see myself as a coach, as an encourager, as a discipler, as a pastor to what God is doing in the hearts of my people here as they engage in God's mission around the world.
Incredible. And so God has taken you and your church through quite a journey here over the past several years. And your church actually suspended the missions committee for, a year and a half? Is that right?
Yeah, that was
18 months?
That happened about 4 years ago.
Okay. So, tell us the story about how that occurred and why you suspended the missions committee. Because, in most churches, we're trying to get them to establish a missions committee, right?
Yeah. Fascinating story. I'll give you the Reader's Digest condensed version. And then if you have a follow-up question, we can unpack parts.
Sure.
But we had a missionary who had retired, and he wrote me a note saying, hey, I would love to come by and say hello to you, Matthew. I'm in the general Michigan area. Is that okay? And I said, fantastic. We have a missions committee meeting. Why don't you come and take the first 10 minutes, give us an update, and we would love to hear from you. He comes in, we start the meeting, he gives his update, 10 minutes go, 15 minutes go, 20 minutes go, and my entire missions team is leaning in to listen to him. And his is not a great story. He's talking at the end of, he has just retired as a missionary. At the end of these many years, he looks back and wonders, did I do missions right? He looks at the churches that have been planted 20, 30 years ago that are still the same size, the same church members that are not replicating, that are not growing. He's wondering, he's asking the central question, did we do discipleship of the people right? Even though we planted churches, even though we went to unreached areas, did we miss the mark in how we did discipleship? And all my members of my team are leaning in for the magic answer. Fearless leader than I am, as it became more and more spiritual, I'm thinking, don't you folks have a small group to go to for spiritual nurture? I've got an agenda to run here, folks. Let's get back on track. But they just leaned into him 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 1 hour, as we are lamenting the state of discipleship in the missions endeavor and recognizing something may be fundamentally wrong with certain sections of missions and how we do missions. And he has got the attention of my team. Being Asian myself, I know that one of the values that we have is we don't open our mouths too fast. So 90 minutes later, I kind of thought maybe the Lord is doing something in our midst. The light bulb went on for me. And I said, let's gather one more time in next month. Let us read through Pursuing God's Will Together by Ruth Haley Barton and figure out, is there something happening here that we need to pay attention to? Because something unique happened. And my well thought through agenda did not even have the opening. I got through opening prayer. After that, it was a disaster. And we met another month, the next month. And I thought we would have been done with the book. We can now get back to my agenda. And there was such a hunger in my team to figure out, are we actually on the discipleship path ourselves?
Wow.
Are we actually being people who can say that we are being spiritually transformed? Do we have a story of transformation that is recent in the last 30 days that we can share amongst ourselves of Jesus encounters? And we realized as I looked around the room that they were in need of that. And I said, if we don't have anything as missions leader of spiritual vitality to bring to the table, we better not be at the table. And we spent the next 18 months rediscovering spiritual disciplines, rediscovering the centrality of transformation, rediscovering the hear and obey rhythm of listening to the Spirit of God, so that we could be on Missio Day listening to God, and not, as one of my team members said, it is so nice that we are committing ourselves to listen to the voice of God and not just affirm Matthew's agenda. We had a fantastic journey for 18 months. And on the backside of that, we came back together, revitalized, ready to go. Now, Dave, I'll just add this on. I know it's a little bit of a longer spiel, but to my humility, that helped my humility, to my sense of pride, those 18 months, almost nothing went wrong with our missions program. It was almost as if God himself blessed it, kept it going, provided funds, provided people, solved issues, and my incredible leadership that was needed was not needed. He was basically saying, follow me, I will take care of all the other stuff. Tremendous lessons for us as a team, and our global outreach efforts at our church were forever changed about 4 years ago.
Wow. By simply taking your agenda off the table and just spending that time listening to God and being transformed yourself.
Absolutely. And this beauty of spiritual disciplines, they're not an end in themselves. They are just disciplines we add to our lives to create the space for God to actually speak and for us to hear. And then it becomes an issue of obedience.
Right. Yes. And so God did speak to you and your team during those 18 months, and you came back and you shifted some things about your global engagement paradigm. Talk to us a little bit about what some of those were.
Now, you know how the Lord leads, because he leads a little nudge at a time. A little nudge at a time. It's rarely the 13-page annotated version of the next 5 years. How I wish he would. But it's always a nudge at a time. And a couple of the things we recognized he was nudging us towards were an investment in the next generation of leadership. And yes, we have some fantastic people in missions in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s in our church. As most North American churches have, missions is largely something that's loved, appreciated, and kept alive by an older generation. And we felt, and we just had a nudge, how do we go about this? And we have, through a variety of activities, created the context where we have been able to engage with the leaders, the younger leaders of our partner churches, of the people on the field that we partner with. That has led to a revitalization of their churches, of releasing them into leadership, of also causing our young people to be part of that story when they saw that we were focused on investing in them, not signing them up for a program, but investing in their journey of listening to the Lord, of spiritual formation, of spiritual maturity. Urbana played a role. when we brought in 30 young people from around the world from our different partnerships, mixed them up with people from our church, bussed down together all the way to St. Louis, experienced that, and then we came back to our church, spent a few days together, ice skating, Michigan in the dead of winter. There's some things we can offer.
Sure.
Ice skating. We had to do a little bit of taking away the Americana culture from Urbana as we tried to identify the missional principles as these folks were going back, investing in them. And that has just refreshed much of our missions. As we have said, we have to invest in our next generation intentionally. Our middle schoolers, our high schoolers go to a 101 program in Tijuana that we intentionally immerse them into an experience of what it means to be in a culture so it's not a short-term trip, it's actually an experience that does not cost an arm and a leg, that allows them to be in incarnational ministry and learn some of the basics. And we have a variety of ways in which we have started to re-engage our young people. A fun one in our children's department, if I may.
Please.
Most of the kids say Bible verses, right? Or they have the teachers use different incentives to keep them behaving well and kind of nudging them in the right direction, whether it's sweets or things. And we suggested, why don't you use some sort of kingdom cash? So we printed out kind of false bills. So every time they do a memory verse, they can put it into a jar that is for their class. Every time there's an incentive and a reward, there's that same cash is put into that jar. And at the end of the year, these kids in their different age groups take a World Relief and a World Vision catalog, and they make decisions on whether they're going to buy goats. What are they going to do with their money that they have counted? They may have about $1,500 worth of false money. But how do they spend that money? And they have an amazing conversation as to why investing in chickens is better than buying a mosquito net. They debate that, which is better.
Really?
And we take their decisions and convert that into actual money and honor them with that. And
that's amazing.
And they feel they're listened to, they feel they're part of missions, and they're engaged. That's just one little way that we slowly get folks at different ages to engage in missions.
Mm-hmm. So aside from investing in the next generation during these many months that you kind of pushed the pause button and you were just seeking the Lord about that in your ministry, what were some other things that God spoke to you about? And how else did you shift your global engagement paradigm?
Two things. One, we recognized early on, and this had maybe the seeds of this were planted even before this pause, but they came into greater light afterwards. The locus of attention of a relationship with a global partner is best not with the missions pastor, nor with the lead pastor. It's best with the average Joe and Jane of the congregation.
Sure.
And how we invest in getting them engaged, training them up to do missions, to relate, to actually make that international trip while I remain back home, that they're the ones making the trip. They're the ones traveling. And they are relating not just to the pastors on that end, but also to the congregants on that end. So how do we reverse engineer the global partnership relationship arc into congregations at both ends was something that we have spent time on. And we have today in our church at least, I said 70 leaders who have downstream about 5 to 10 people each on each of their teams. So we would have about 400 to 500 people in our church who are engaged in missions in some way or the other. And I see my job as being a coach to them and not traveling the world. I get to travel the world when there's a problem or
Okay.
that needs a charming personality to fix it, or something like that. But anyway, we have found reverse engineering missions so that you don't need to be a speaker, you don't have to have deep pockets, but you should have one quality: the ability to be a friend, the ability to be curious, the ability to sustain, especially a cross-cultural friendship that honors and respects the other. That's enough. If you have that, with the Lord's help, we can make you a missions-engaged person in a couple of years.
That's incredible. So what was that number beforehand, before this 18-month pause?
Well, I would actually, like I said, it had it started a little earlier before that. But when I came to Trinity, it was largely a 12-member missions committee that carried the entire burden of missions.
Wow.
And they were largely a finance committee, figuring out how much money we give this missionary or that missionary. And today we have about 70 core leaders running the entire missions program at Trinity.
Incredible. And deep engagement of members in the congregation.
Absolutely. Releasing decision-making to them, releasing even some financial decisions to them, so that I am not seen as Santa Claus who has even financial purse strings attached to me. I see myself, the value I provide is strategy, better pedagogy, and the encouragement of leaders to encourage other leaders, the modeling of what it is for a church to be involved in missions.
Yeah, what a shift. Wow. Do you have anything else that occurred during that time that you can share about? And then I want to go back and visit the shift to the next generation here in a little bit.
One of the interesting moments when we were, and I wrote about this recently in the Catalyst postings of the June version.
I saw that today. Yeah.
And I just think it was one of those moments when we were talking, 2 or 3 of us were talking with 2 or 3 of the leaders of the Irish church. And we were talking about partnership, doing mutual respect, honor. We need one another, the 1 Corinthians 12 passage. We did one day, second day, just relaying the groundwork on what it means to be good friends from a biblical perspective, not taking anything for granted. But on the third day, I'm a bit of a pragmatist. I need to have a few goals on what this thing is going to achieve. And I wanted to get out of this, this just a theological conversation to something practical. Where are we going to go? And I thought a wonderful question would be, what are your needs? I've heard that so many times.
Yeah.
And Dave, I thought that question in my mind. I know my brain signaled my mouth to say that question, what are your needs? But if I ever had a charismatic moment, what came out of my mouth are, what are your strengths?
Wow.
And I was shocked. And being the quick thinker that I am, I asked them to go first because I had to replan. What did I just say here? And where did that come from? And they listed out 5 strengths that their little church had of 35 people. Without any hesitation: cold evangelism, feeding the poor, the resilience to continue to go forward even when they don't have money in the bank. And our large church from Michigan barely came up with 2.5 unique strengths. That dynamic in the room changed. They realized the living God has given them far more gifts, apparently at first blush, than this big Goliath from the West. We can tango with them. We can dance with these guys as equals. And that was a huge shift for me in my entire understanding of partnership from there onwards, that we build our partnerships on mutual strengths. And together, we move forward. Not on mutual needs, where one becomes where a power differential happens, and there's a subservient, dependent relationship there, but on mutual strengths. I also realized, and then we'll maybe shift back to the next generation, that when there is life and when there is momentum, I would use language maybe that the evil one is always ready to negate things. And I felt that the negation we were getting was to be satisfied with just relationships. We have church-to-church relationships. We have people who are kingdom professionals who are placed outside of mission agencies in the global workplace, in the global economy, doing great Christian work. We have ways in which money is being distributed creatively. We have a great system that was going on. But we realized where the evil one was probably checkmating us, that we were starting to rejoice in our system, in what we had going. The question we felt we had to ask is, what is missionally being achieved? Are new people who have never heard of Jesus hearing of Jesus? Are new people who have never heard the name of Jesus crossing the line of faith? Are people who have crossed the line of faith growing in a love for Jesus and obedience to Jesus? So we felt that even though we were missional in our entire enterprise, we always had to make sure that everything we did was for the sake of those outside of us. So even if two churches were in relationship, we had to push ourselves. The idea was not create global pen palship, but is there a third locus where we are pushing back the edge of darkness, where we are engaging in missions and in evangelism, in social justice, in standing up, being Christ bearers, being Christophers, with a missional agenda. And it just surprised me how much churches, if I could dare use that phrase, can become all about us.
Yeah.
And not about those who are outside the church walls. And I think missions enterprises also have the same challenge. We become about keeping our missions enterprise going with all its wonderful successes and spirituality and energy and stories. And we have to ask the question, do we really still exist for those who have not yet heard of Jesus? And keep that centrifugal force at work and not the centripetal thing that pulls it back towards us.
Right, right. What a transformation, and what incredible things God has done during this time that you really just paused to focus on hearing from the Lord. And so now, as you implement some of these new paradigms or new, I hesitate to call them strategies, but these things that God has spoken to you about, and specifically the shift to the next generation, how has that affected your sending pipeline? Is a term we hear a lot, right? But not only with your own church, but with those that you partner with.
So we hold the word sending carefully, because in many ways, as we sense what is happening on the global stage with our partners as well as with our own church, there is more of a need we sense to have our people dispersed into the world as the yeast, to use the Matthew passage, as the yeast, permeating, influencing, being lights in darkness. Mm-hmm. While we do still send missionaries, and I still have missionaries in my missionary sending pipeline, I have found that it is almost as successful to encourage young people to learn to say yes to Jesus, even if it means going and being an accountant in the next state over, even if it means being a professor, just getting their PhD and we're going to the deep south, to Arkansas, to Alabama, and I'm going to be a professor in this university. Even if it means going to the Middle East to teach in a Muslim university as an English teacher and paid for by them. Even if it means going with my PhD from Berkeley and going to a place in Southeast Asia and being paid by the Chinese government for research, but actually being the principal research consultant for many of the translating agencies in that area, even if it means a different way of engagement. We have found breathing these possibilities into our young people brings them to life.
Mm-hmm.
Saying, come, go to missionary training camp, join a mission agency, is not pulling our young people as we did 30 years ago. Something has changed. I am not a sociologist. I'm not an anthropologist, so I'm not able to fully examine that. But I'm a very pragmatic guy, so I'll pivot and try something else without throwing this out. So we do have this continuing. I do have people in the pipeline that we are sending, and I'll make a few comments about how we send. But we have found encouraging people to say yes to Jesus.
Right.
And trusting the Lord to lead them forward is far more important in those few years that we have them with us.
Absolutely, because there are so many various roles in the Great Commission. Amen. And whether it is in the marketplace or a traditional missionary route, whether it's welcoming or mobilizing or financing or encouraging missionaries that are currently on the field, just a vast many ways to be able to involve our congregations in the Great Commission, and God has done that so well at your church there, and it's just amazing to hear about this journey. So talk to us a little bit about how you do send before we sign off today.
So if it's on the sending process, we recognized that we have to be attentive to what God is doing, right? So that's a huge premise for us starting. So when people come in to talk with us, what we try to sense is not whether they have a valid call or not. That is not ours to judge. The call for us is to sense, do they have a call in line with our three values that we say that we are going to get engaged in? So I think it's important for a church to say that God has uniquely called you to do 2 or 3 things and to stay focused on that. So for us, it is strengthening people among the lesser reached people groups, church planting amongst unreached people groups, strategic intervention on behalf of the poor and the marginalized. So I had an invitation to help with a church plant in Hawaii. Shucks. It did not align with where we said we were going to go.
That's too
it was
bad.
terrible. It was terrible. So we had to just say, no, that is not our church's calling. But if you feel that is your calling, we will connect you with people to help you be obedient to that. So the clarity with which we as an organization, as a church, understand our own sense of calling helps us in saying yes to those we want to partner with. It has very little to do whether they're authentic or not authentic. That is not ours to do. That belongs to the good Lord. We've also felt that we cannot only take people from our own congregation. We have to accept people from other congregations. God, we serve a kingdom God. We don't serve a Trinity Church God. And so we have missionaries from the Assemblies of God, from the Baptist churches, from Brethren churches, from Presbyterian churches. You name it, we've got them. It's part of our understanding that unless we demonstrate a kingdom inclusiveness from the get-go, we cannot talk about the kingdom. So
it's beautiful.
Then the next thing we do once we have said yes to somebody, we do 2 things. We spend almost 2 years with them, encouraging them to develop relationships with the folks in our church. Because we want it to be, they are sent by the people of the church, they are not sent by the missions committee. So we get them involved in different small groups, different projects, different ways in which we can help them with their profile. And then once they have some sense of where they're going, who they want them to be, what their calling is, we actually help them get on to the mission field without a formal sending from the platform. We do not send them from the platform. We have found out that many missionaries, they hit the mission field. It's only after 2 years they really figure out who who they are, what their calling is, what's the specificity of their calling. And we do not want to lock them into a place where they're now embarrassed to make a change because of this big hoopla that we threw by setting them from the church platform. So we allow them 2 years to figure it out. Are they really meant for this? Or it was not Niger that I was called to, it was Nigeria I was called to. We can make those corrections without shaming anybody. We can reposition them, we can retool them, we can re-resource them so that they can succeed. Once that is done, we bring them back and we send them from the platform so that they have a clarity of where they're going. And they're not just going to save all of Africa and all of China when they land and within 3 months. There's a realism, there is a recognition of their limitations, and we are ready to engage at that point. Fundamentally, for a church, because we have taken the long route, Dave, with about 2 years, 3 years to get them finally set, guess what? By that time, because of the hands-on working with them, they're almost 100% funded. And I don't have to pull too much out of the global outreach budget to send them off.
Incredible.
Which for those missions committees out there where money is an issue, I would say love them, walk with them, talk with them, introduce them, and even that funding issue will get solved within 2.5 years as we train them to invite others into it. And so don't look at your budget and say, I don't have enough money to send more missionaries. That's the last thing we want to say.
Right.
Sending missionaries is not connected with the budgets that we have.
Wonderful. What an incredible discussion this has been. And Matthew, if our listeners would like to ask you more questions about your church's journey, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, they could always write you. They know the podcast. They know you, Dave. Or they could write me directly at matthewaphillip@gmail.com. I'm more than happy to respond to anyone. We help each other. I've been helped by many. I've been forgiven by many. I've been healed by many, strengthened by many. So I'd be more than happy to walk alongside anyone who wants to be a more excited, passionate Christ bearer in this world that is looking for authentic people who love the Lord, where there's the power of the gospel, signs and wonders, the ability to say there's a new kingdom with hope and love and light, and that we are part of that.
Well, that's incredible. Thank you so much. And we'll be sure to put your email address in the show notes, so you can just go to the podcast page on missionarymobilization.org and click there to get in touch with Matthew. Wondering, have you, listener, ever thought about getting a master's degree? Would you like to study things like trends and issues in mobilization, or mobilization in church context like we've been talking about today? Or how about missions coaching and mentoring? Well, now you can. Check out our partner, Trinity Bible College and Graduate School's new Intercultural Studies Master of Arts degree with an optional track in missions mobilization. This one-of-a-kind grad degree is now accepting applicants for the fall semester. And so for more information, send us an email to hello@missionarymobilization.org or visit trinitybiblecollege.edu for more information. Again, Matthew, thanks so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. My honor. Thank you so much.
And until next time, everyone, let's keep praying for more laborers to work in His harvest fields.
Amen.
You've been listening to the Missionary Mobilization Podcast, a ministry of the Center for Missionary Mobilization and Retention at Trinity Bible College and Graduate School. You can access free resources online at missionarymobilization.org. Also, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Missionary Mobilization. Thanks for listening.